She never meant to buy a dying restaurant. She only had $100 left, barely enough to keep her daughter warm for another night. But fate has a strange way of whispering to the desperate. And when Elena Ramirez raised her trembling hand at the city auction, she had no idea she was claiming a building that had been hiding a $90 million secret beneath its rotting floorboards. A secret people once killed for. A secret someone still wants back, and tonight, that someone has finally found her. After the auctioneer's final echo faded into the hollow room, Elena Ramirez stepped into the biting air with that thin slip of paper clutched between her fingers, the deed that had cost her the last $100 she owned. The wind cut along the cracked sidewalk as if testing her resolve, tugging at her worn jacket, blowing strands of dark hair across her tired face. She stood there for a moment, staring at the paper, wondering if she had just saved her life, or destroyed what little hope she had left. Her breath trembled in the cold. Her shoulders sagged under months of fear she never admitted to anyone, not even to herself. But she couldn't stand still. Life never gave her the luxury, so she walked. Her boots scraped against broken pavement as she made her way toward the rusted building. She had somehow purchased a derelict restaurant buried in the forgotten strip of East Harbor Street, a place most people passed without looking, a place the city tried to demolish twice, a place that had been silent for so long it felt like even the wind avoided speaking its name. But tonight, it belonged to her. Her footsteps slowed as the hulking shape came into view, a sagging roofline, boarded windows, a faded sign hanging crooked like a tired arm. Vesaris, the ghostly letters still read, though half of them were swallowed by grime and time. Elena's heart pressed painfully against her ribs. She'd seen it before, of course. She'd walked by it for years. But she had never imagined it would be hers, not like this, not in desperation, not in the hollow space between survival and surrender. A heavy raindrop struck her cheek, then another. The sky grumbled like an old man disturbed from sleep. She swallowed hard. Her entire life had taught her to keep going, through working 2 jobs, through raising a daughter alone, through losing one job, then the next. Through eviction notices slid under the door like accusations, through choosing between groceries and rent, through praying quietly every night for a miracle that never seemed to come. But miracles don't always look holy. Sometimes they look like abandoned buildings with crooked signs. Elena approached the entrance, her hand trembling around the cold handle of the door. The rusted metal resisted her first pull, groaning as if waking from a long sleep. With a desperate shove, it finally gave way, releasing a cold breath of stale air and forgotten years. She stepped inside. Darkness swallowed her first. Then the faint smell of mildew, damp wood, and something older, something like burnt spices, lingering in an empty kitchen long after the last chef had left. The floor creaked beneath her weight, complaining softly. Dust floated in slow motion, illuminated by the thin sliver of streetlight crawling through a broken window. The silence inside was absolute, the kind that made you feel watched. Elena's breath hitched. She whispered to herself, "It's just a building, just walls, just wood, nothing more." But something in her chest tightened, as if some part of her already knew the truth that this place wasn't empty. Not really. It held stories, secrets, shadows of people who once stood right where she was standing. She took a few steps forward, her boots pressing softly against layers of dust. Chairs lay overturned across the main dining area, their legs snapped or missing. The bar counter was cracked, its varnish peeling like old skin. The walls were covered in a patchwork of grime and faded memories. And in the center of the room, beneath years of decay, sat the faint outline of one, elegant tiles now chipped, broken, but still clinging to the promise that this place had once held beauty. Lightning flickered outside, illuminating the room for a heartbeat. That's when she saw it, a long streak carved into the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged across it years ago. A path cutting from the center of the dining area toward the kitchen door. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. Her eyes narrowed. What happened here? She breathed. She had no answer, but she stepped forward anyway. Her hand brushed across a dusty table as she passed, leaving a trail behind. She imagined laughter once filled this room, families dining, couples sharing meals, celebrations echoing across the walls. That was before bankruptcy, before rumors swallowed the restaurant whole, before the strange headlines 20 years ago, before the sudden closure, before its owner vanished. But Elena didn't know all that yet. She only knew she needed a roof, a chance, a beginning. In the quiet space, a memory flickered. Her daughter, Marina, looking up at her that morning with wide brown eyes. "Mom, what will we do now?" Elena's chest tightened. This building wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a plan. It was simply the last thing she could afford. The last thread she could grab before everything unraveled completely. Another step, another creak beneath her boots. She reached the kitchen doorway. The smell deepened: mold, rust, something long abandoned. As lightning flashed again, she spotted a rusted pot, still sitting on the stove, coated in thick dust, like the last meal was left behind in a hurry. Cabinets hung open, drawers overturned. A single plate lay shattered on the floor. Something inside her whispered, "Someone left this kitchen too fast." She crouched, touching one of the shards, cold, jagged, sharp. A sudden rumble of thunder shook the walls, and Elena straightened quickly, brushing off her knees. Her heart thumped harder than it should, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. "This is fine," she murmured. "It's all fixable." She said it again, just to hear confidence in her own voice. "It's fixable." She had patched holes in more than buildings her entire life. She could handle this. She had to. Marina trusted her. Tomorrow she would start cleaning, scrubbing, repairing, turning this place into something they could live in. Even if just temporarily. But something caught her eye as she turned toward the back hallway, a flicker of movement. A shadow, or simply a trick of lightning. She froze, pulse thundering in her ears. The hallway remained still. She exhaled shakily and forced herself to look around again, grounding herself in the present. The silence pressed in, thick and uneasy, but not threatening, not yet. The storm outside grew louder, rain hammering against the boarded windows like impatient fists. The restaurant trembled slightly, its old wooden bones creaking under the pressure, as if whispering warnings in a language she couldn't understand. Elena rubbed her fingertips along her temple. She was exhausted. Hope, fear, and hunger twisted together in her chest, draining the little strength she had left. She made her way back toward the front of the restaurant, each step slower than the last. The weight of the day finally dragged on her shoulders. She paused in the doorway, glancing once more at the cracked tiles beneath her feet. That was when she noticed it. An uneven patch in the floor, subtle but unmistakable, almost like the boards had shifted over time, or like they'd been tampered with. She crouched, brushing her hand over it. Dust broke apart under her touch. The board dipped slightly at one end, giving the faintest hollow echo when she pressed down. Her breath stilled. Was it just rotten wood, or something else? Her heart whispered questions her mind wasn't ready to face. Not tonight. She stood slowly, trying to shake off the strange feeling crawling up her spine. She stepped outside, locking the door behind her with a shaky twist of the old key. The storm roared, but she barely noticed it now, because as she walked away, The memory of that hollow thump echoed with every step she took, soft at first, then louder, haunting her thoughts with every beat of thunder. She didn't know it yet. But beneath that uneven patch of floor, beneath those creaking boards and tired tiles, beneath the dust and decay, her entire life was about to change, and not all miracles come with light. Some hide in darkness. As the storm deepened behind her, Elena had no idea that the story was only beginning. After leaving the restaurant behind and letting the storm swallow the night, Elena walked the long way home with rain soaking her clothes and numbing her fingers. But the echo of that hollow floorboard stayed, lodged in her chest like a warning she couldn't shake. By the time she reached the cramped, temporary room she and her daughter were renting, her body felt heavier than her soaked jacket. Marina was asleep on the small mattress pushed against the wall, her tiny legs curled up tight, her breathing soft, innocent, unaware of how close their world was to collapsing. Elena sank into the creaky chair in the corner, peeling off her wet coat with trembling hands. The dim light from the flickering bulb cast shadows across the thin wallpaper, turning the room into a faded map of worries. She placed the folded deed on the small table, smoothing it with care, as if pressing it might press her life back into order. A long breath escaped her. She should feel relieved. She should feel grateful. She should feel like she had won something. But instead, she felt the sharp ache of uncertainty gnawing at her ribs. Her eyes drifted to Marina. The little girl's hair fell in tangled curls across her cheek, dark lashes resting peacefully. Elena's heart tightened. Everything she did was for her. Every risk, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead and whispered, "I'll fix this, I promise." But promises were heavy things. She leaned back, letting exhaustion drag her under for a brief moment. The storm outside drummed against the window like distant footsteps. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, she saw the restaurant again, the darkness, the dust, the uneven floor, the strange drag mark across the dining room. The open cabinets, the overturned plate. Someone had left in a hurry. Someone had walked out of that kitchen and never returned. Why? She rubbed her temples. She didn't need mysteries. She needed stability. She needed income. She needed a way to keep her head above the rising tide of bills and fear. Tomorrow would have to be better. When dawn finally crept across the sky, soft and gray, Elena woke with her cheek pressed against the table and the deed still beneath her hand. A thin streak of sunlight slipped through the blinds, brushing across the room like a fragile hope. Marina stirred, stretching with a soft groan. "Mom, did you find us a home?" Elena hesitated just for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Yes, baby, I did." Marina's tired eyes brightened just a little. "Can I see it today?" Elena forced a smile. "Yes, after breakfast." There wasn't much for breakfast: a half box of cereal, a few crackers, a single bruised apple. Elena split everything carefully, making sure Marina ate the most. As the little girl chatted about school and the drawing she wanted to hang in their new house, Elena listened with a soft ache blooming in her chest. Children had a way of believing in magic even when the world offered none. After getting dressed, Elena checked her bag, a toolkit with mismatched screwdrivers, a flashlight, gloves, and an old notebook filled with budgeting hopes that no longer added up. She locked the door behind them, and together they stepped into the cool morning. They took the bus to East Harbor Street. When they approached the restaurant, Marina's steps slowed, her small hand squeezing Elena's tightly. The building loomed against the sky like a tired giant leaning toward them. "Mom, is it safe?" Elena crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. "It needs love, that's all." Marina nodded bravely, trusting her mother's voice more than her own fear. They stepped inside. The morning light softened the room in a way the storm never had. Dust still filled the air like suspended memories, but it didn't feel as menacing. It felt old, waiting, watching. Marina wrinkled her nose. It smells funny. It's just old wood, Elena said gently, though she wasn't fully sure. They began cleaning at least the surface. Elena opened windows to let fresh air push out the stale scent. She swept layers of dust into piles, each stroke revealing hidden parts of the floor. Marina picked up fallen utensils and stacked them on a counter that leaned to one side like a crooked smile. As they worked, sunlight slowly crawled across the floor, tracing the outline of the restaurant with warm hands. Hours passed. The room transformed slightly from suffocating to breathable, but Elena's eyes kept drifting to the uneven board near the center of the dining room. Every time she swept around it, she felt a quiet tug, a whisper, a question. She crouched again, pressing her palm lightly over the surface. Hollow, not soft, not broken, hollow. She tapped gently. The sound answered like a muted drum, deeper than the boards around it. Her stomach tightened. "Mom?" Marina asked from across the room, wiping dust from a chair with her sleeve. "What's that noise?" "Nothing," Elena said too quickly. "Just old flooring." But she didn't move. Her fingers traced the edges of the board. Their faint but real were markings that didn't match the others. Slight scratches, a nail that sat strangely flush, an edge that dipped lower. Someone had replaced this board, not recently, but intentionally. For a moment, fear rose through her like cold water. Then she stood. Her daughter was watching, and she couldn't afford to lose herself in paranoia. Not now. Not when she was trying to build a home, not tear it down with doubts. "Come on," she said softly. "Help me clean the back hallway." Together they moved further into the building, gathering trash, dragging out broken pieces of furniture, sweeping debris from corners where spiders had built kingdoms of silk. Marina hummed while she worked, her voice soft, carrying innocence through the dusty air. But every so often, a faint thump echoed in Elena's memory. That floorboard, that hollow sound, that strange drag mark on the tiles. By late afternoon, the sun dipped lower, turning the windows gold. The restaurant looked slightly less haunted, slightly more reclaimable. Elena leaned against the counter, wiping sweat from her brow. Marina plopped down on one of the sturdier chairs. "This place is huge. It used to be popular," Elena said, scanning the worn decor. "People once loved coming here. What happened?" Elena paused. She didn't know the answer. The deed had come with no history, no warnings, no explanations. Just a signature, a date, and the city's eagerness to be rid of it. "Maybe the owner left," she said finally. "Maybe they had to leave quickly." Marina tilted her head. "Why quickly?" Elena didn't reply. But as she looked across the room, her gaze fell again on that uneven corner of the floor, on the way the boards didn't line up perfectly, on the faint scorch mark that ran beside it like a scar, on the idea, the unsettling possibility that something important lay beneath their feet. The air grew still for a heartbeat. A quiet tension settled over the room. "Mom," Marina's voice broke the moment. "Can we go home now? I'm tired." Elena nodded. "Yes, we've done enough for today." She packed their things, closed the door gently, locked it with the old, reluctant key. But as they walked away, twilight stretching long shadows behind them, Elena glanced over her shoulder one last time. The restaurant sat in silence, its windows glowing faintly with the last light of day. And for a split second a breath, a flicker, she thought she saw movement inside, a shift of shadow, a brief change in the light. But when she blinked it was gone. She told herself it was nothing. Just dust, just exhaustion, just her mind pulling tricks after a long day. She didn't yet know. The secrets beneath those floorboards had been waiting for decades, waiting for footsteps, waiting for hands, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to return. And now, at last, someone had. As evening settled into night and the last warmth slipped from the sky, Elena felt a quiet shiver crawl up her spine. The restaurant was far from done with her, and as darkness deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. After the restless night that followed their first day inside the abandoned restaurant, Elena returned at sunrise with a toolbox in one hand and the quiet determination of someone who had no choice but to make this place work. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of the ocean several blocks away. Mist clung to the street like a thin veil, softening the edges of the broken storefronts around her. East Harbor Street looked calmer in the morning light, almost forgiving, as if offering her one more chance to change her life. She slipped the old key into the lock. The mechanism resisted, groaning, but then clicked open with a tired sigh. When she pushed the door inward, the familiar breath of stale air seeped around her, carrying dust, mildew, and the imprint of years left untouched. But morning sunlight spilled in behind her, slicing through the shadows and landing across the floor in warm, golden stripes. The beams revealed what yesterday's work had achieved: cleared pathways, cleaner air, a faint sense that the room was willing to remember its old glory. If she was willing to coax it back, "This is it," she whispered. "Today we make real progress." She set the toolbox on a nearby table, brushing off the dust with the side of her hand. As she looked around, her gaze drifted inevitably to that uneven patch in the floor, subtle, but impossible to forget. It lingered at the edges of her thoughts like an unfinished sentence, but she forced herself to look away. Not today. She had work to do. She started in the front, pulling down battered curtains, removing broken glass, picking up fallen boards. The more she cleared, the more the space opened up, revealing hints of what the restaurant used to be: elegant tile patterns beneath dirt, decorative trim along the walls, a row of old wine racks still intact behind the bar. The morning progressed slowly. Dust clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin, turning her into a ghost among ghosts, but she pushed on, driven by the quiet fire in her chest. Hours later, the soft pitter of footsteps entered the doorway. "Mom," Elena turned to see Marina standing there, clutching her backpack. The little girl blinked up at the dim room with wide, curious eyes. Elena smiled softly. "How was school?" "Okay," Marina said, stepping inside. "I told my teacher we're moving into a restaurant. She said that's unusual." Elena snorted gently. "She's not wrong." Marina dropped her bag onto a clean section of the floor. "Can I help again?" "Of course," Elena said, handing her a pair of gloves. "But start with something small. Maybe clean the host stand." Marina darted off with a grin. Elena took a deep breath and returned to her own work, heading into the back hallway where shadows stretched long against the walls. She began removing old posters and broken hooks, stacking them neatly for disposal. Yet as she moved deeper into the corridor, she found something she hadn't noticed the day before. A doorway she assumed was just a pantry wasn't fully closed. Its frame sat crooked, misaligned, as if someone had shoved it too hard in the past. Curiosity pricked at her. She pulled gently at the handle. The door creaked open. A narrow storage room revealed itself, filled with crates stacked haphazardly and shelves coated in thick dust. Cobwebs draped from corners like abandoned curtains. Elena stepped inside slowly, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. The air felt heavy, still, as though time had stopped here long before the rest of the building fell silent. She scanned the shelves, rusted spatulas, unopened jars of spices long expired, empty wine bottles. Then her light stopped on something strange, a small wooden box wedged at the back of the top shelf. Its lid was carved with spiraled patterns, old but carefully crafted. She reached up and slid it forward. The movement stirred dust into the air like a sigh. Elena held the box in her hands for a moment. It felt unexpectedly heavy, solid. She carried it out into the hallway and opened it carefully. Inside lay papers, old menus, faded receipts, and beneath them something unexpected, a leather-bound ledger. Her breath hitched. She lifted it gently, brushing off the dust. The cover was cracked with age, its leather soft like worn fabric. On the front, faintly embossed, were the initials MV. She didn't know who that was, but the building once had a name, Vasari's. Her hands tingled. She opened the ledger. The first pages were filled with neat handwriting, numbers, quantities, notes about ingredients and daily sales. A chef's record, a restaurant owner's log. But a dozen pages in, the tone changed. The lines became hurried, the ink darker. Pressing harder against the paper, the notes shifted from simple business entries to emotional confessions. They came after closing. I heard them in the hallway again. The money is safe, but for how long? Elena's breath froze. She turned the page. I didn't want this. I just wanted to cook. But once you owe them, you don't get to walk away. Her pulse pounded behind her ears. She flipped another page. If anything happens to me, the truth is beneath their feet. A cold shiver crawled up her spine. Beneath their feet. Elena slammed the ledger shut without meaning to. Her fingers trembled. That uneven board, that hollow echo, that strange drag mark across the tiles. Suddenly everything she tried to ignore pulsed with new significance. She stood there for a long moment, breathing carefully, grounding herself as fear and curiosity twisted in her chest like entwined vines. She needed clarity. She needed calm. So she walked back to the dining area, trying to steady her thoughts. Marina looked up from the host stand. Mom, are you okay? Elena forced a smile. Just found something old. What is it? A book. Nothing important, but the way her voice cracked revealed everything she couldn't say. Marina wandered over, eyes drifting to the ledger in Elena's hands. Is it like a diary? I have one at school. Something like that, Elena murmured. She set the ledger gently on a table, resisting the urge to open it again. Answers could wait. It was more important to finish today's goal. She had to focus on cleaning, not mysteries, on survival, not secrets. She grabbed a broom and headed toward the far corner, but the weight of the ledger followed her like a whisper. Afternoon turned into early evening. They scrubbed surfaces, wiped windows, dragged broken furniture out the back door into the alley. The place still looked rough, old paint peeling, cracks in the ceiling, dirt that refused to surrender, but there was movement, purpose, transformation. Even the air smelled different, less like a grave of forgotten dreams and more like a space reclaiming breath. At sunset, Marina yawned, curling up in one of the booths, her head resting on a cushion Elena had dusted earlier. Her small form looked peaceful against the glow of orange light filtering through the windows. Elena covered her gently with her jacket and continued cleaning around her, quietly, but each step brought her closer and closer to that uneven board. By the time the sun fully dipped behind the horizon, the room was swallowed again by shadows. That's when it happened. Elena accidentally dropped the broom. It hit the floor with a loud clatter, and the sound that followed didn't echo like wood on wood. It echoed like wood on emptiness, hollow, deep, almost metallic. Elena froze, her breath lodged in her throat. She crouched slowly, pressing her hand over the exact spot the broom had landed. She tapped once. The sound answered immediately, a low, muffled thump. Her pulse hammered. She tapped again. Same answer, same hollow whisper. Her fingertips began to tremble. This wasn't rotten wood. This wasn't natural shifting. This was deliberate. Someone had hidden something beneath this floor. Her eyes widened. The ledger's words screamed in her memory. The truth is beneath their feet. She stood abruptly, her breath unsteady, scanning the room as if expecting the shadows to move. But everything remained still. Marina slept quietly in the booth, unaware of the storm building inside her mother. Elena backed away from the hollow board, her mind racing. Her instincts warred with each other, fear urging her to walk out, curiosity urging her to rip the floor open. responsibility whispering that she needed to protect her daughter first. She grabbed her toolbox, her fingers hovered over the crowbar. For a long moment she didn't move, then slowly she pulled the crowbar free. She walked toward the uneven board with measured steps, each one heavier than the last. She knelt beside the spot, pressing the metal tool against the seam. Her breath hitched as she applied pressure. The board groaned. Then a sharp creak split through the silence. The edge of the board lifted, just slightly, enough to reveal darkness where solid ground should have been, enough to confirm everything she feared, enough to start something she could never undo. Elena released the crowbar and sat back on her heels, chest rising and falling quickly. She wasn't ready, not tonight, not alone. Not with Marina nearby. She gently pressed the board back down, ensuring it settled flush again. Her hands shook as she stood, wiping her palms on her jeans. She moved to the booth and shook her daughter softly. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "time to go home." Marina blinked groggily. "Already?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice tight. "We need rest." They left quietly. Elena locked the door behind her, gripping the key until her knuckles turned white. The truth beneath those floorboards wasn't going anywhere. But tonight, she had to face something even more unsettling, the realization that the abandoned restaurant she thought was simply a burden was hiding something that wanted to be found. And as the night settled over the street, heavy and absolute, Elena couldn't escape the feeling that once she opened that floor, really opened it, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The darkness deepened, and the story was only beginning. After the night pressed itself heavy across the city, Elena slept restlessly, turning over every creak, every hollow echo, every line from the ledger repeating in her mind like a broken chorus. When dawn finally arrived, pale and hesitant, she woke with the feeling that her life was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't yet name. Marina still slept soundly beside her, curled up beneath a thin blanket. Elena watched her for a long moment, taking in the quiet rise and fall of her daughter's chest, the smallness of her hands, the innocence she wished she could protect forever. The world had already stolen too much from her. Elena wouldn't allow it to take more, but the ledger, the floorboard, the hollow sound, they clawed at her thoughts. By the time the sun stretched its first rays across the sky, she had already made her decision. She would return to the restaurant alone. She would investigate. She would learn what this building was trying to hide and whether the secret within it threatened their life or their chance at a future. She dressed quietly, leaving a note for Marina on the small kitchen table. "Back soon. Stay inside, I love you." She kissed her daughter's forehead, then stepped out into the cool morning air. East Harbor Street was quiet when she arrived, the morning mist creeping low across the pavement. The restaurant loomed ahead, its faded letters barely visible through the haze. Elena unlocked the door with steady hands she didn't quite feel. Inside, the silence greeted her like an old acquaintance, thick, watchful, familiar now in its heaviness. She stepped forward, letting the light spill across the room as she opened a few more windows. Dust drifted lazily through the beams, swirling like tired spirits. Waking from sleep, she set her bag down beside the bar, her gaze instinctively drifting toward the ledger she had left behind the night before. But it wasn't where she left it. Her breath stilled. The journal, once lying on a dusty table, had been moved slightly. Not far, just a tilt, a shift, but enough to tell her that something or someone had touched it. Her heartbeat tightened. She scanned the room. Nothing moved, no footprints, no displaced tools, just that subtle shift. She approached the table slowly and placed a hand on the ledger, as if reassuring herself it was real. "Maybe I moved it," she whispered aloud, though she didn't believe it. Pushing fear aside, she gathered her tools and walked toward the uneven floorboard, the place where the air felt thickest, where secrets pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the wood. The restaurant was fully silent now, too silent. As if holding its breath, Elena knelt down. Her fingers hovered above the board, remembering the sound, the weight, the dread it carried. She slid the crowbar into the seam and braced herself. This time she didn't hesitate. She pressed downward with more force than the night before. The board creaked, sharply splitting the quiet in two. Dust scattered upward as the wood lifted from its frame. She pulled it aside and set it carefully on the floor. A dark, narrow space yawned beneath her. The air that escaped was colder than the room above, colder than it should have been. As if sealed away from sunlight for decades, Elena held her breath and leaned closer. What she saw wasn't dirt or crawlspace foundation. It wasn't empty earth or forgotten plumbing. It was structure, wooden beams forming a low, hidden chamber. The faint outline of something beneath them, shapes wrapped in cloth, edges of boxes, maybe containers. Her pulse pounded. She grabbed her flashlight, switched it on, and directed the beam downward. The light cut through the darkness. Her breath caught. Below her were several objects arranged tightly against each other: containers, sealed packages, a locked metal trunk. Dust coated everything like gray snow, but nothing looked rotted. Nothing looked like it had been casually tossed there. Someone had arranged these things carefully, deliberately, secretly. A chill slid down her arms, but something else stood out, something even stranger. One of the containers had scorch marks along the side, dark and irregular, as if it had been heated or burned long ago. Another had what looked like letters carved faintly into the wood, though she couldn't read them from this angle. She swallowed hard. She had to go down. The space wasn't large, she would barely fit, but she couldn't ignore it, not after everything she'd seen, not after what the ledger implied. She lowered herself slowly, feet first, carefully gripping the edges of the opening. The hidden chamber was cramped, forcing her to crouch once she reached the bottom. The air was cold enough to sting her lungs. The flashlight beam moved across each object as she steadied herself. She reached toward the closest container, a wooden crate sealed with rusted nails. The lid was warped slightly. She pried it open gently. Inside was paper, stacks of it, bundles wrapped with old twine. She pulled one out. It was money, old bills, crisp despite their age, bound tightly, stacked neatly, dozens, maybe hundreds. Her hands shook. She opened another bundle, more money, more stacks, more neat rows of bills. Her breath turned shallow. She set the cash aside and aimed her flashlight toward the metal trunk. In the corner, its latch was thick, rusted, locked. But what caught her attention wasn't the lock, it was the symbol etched into the lid. A simple emblem, two interlocking rings, familiar somehow. She reached out and touched it, tracing its outline. Cold, heavy, purposeful. She shined her light around again. More crates, more bundles, more signs of rushed, deliberate hiding. She stepped closer to the trunk. Her fingers found the seam where the lid met the base. Locked. But less important than the realization settling over her, this wasn't a random stash. This wasn't forgotten storage. This was the beginning of something much larger, something buried for a reason. The ledger's words echoed again in her mind. They came after closing. The money is safe, but for how long, if anything happens to me? The truth is beneath their feet. Even as the air grew colder around her, sweat began to form at the back of her neck. She wasn't supposed to find this, not her, not anyone. She reached toward the metal trunk again, gripping the handles as if weighing its significance. Suddenly a thump echoed above her, soft, quick, deliberate to be the settling of old wood. Elena froze. Her light shook in her hand as she listened, her ears straining to catch any sound from above. Silence, then another thump, closer, heavier. Someone was in the restaurant. Her heart jolted violently. Slowly, silently, she moved toward the opening she had climbed through. She angled her body and pressed her ear against the underside of the floor. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving across the dining room. Her breath stopped. This wasn't Marina. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't anyone she expected. Her hands trembled as she turned off the flashlight. Darkness wrapped around her like a cold cloak. The footsteps paused directly above her. Her pulse pounded so hard it felt like it might echo up through the floor. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to quiet her breath. The footsteps moved again, heading toward the front door. A moment of tense silence. Then the door creaked open, closed. The footsteps faded outside. Elena remained in the dark for several long minutes, afraid to move, afraid of what or who waited beyond the shadows. Only when her legs tingled painfully did she climb out from beneath the floor. The dining room was empty, still, deceptively calm. She scanned every corner, every window, every doorway. Whoever had been inside was gone now, but they had been real, and they had known where to look. Her gaze drifted to the ledger again. This building wasn't abandoned, it was watched. She locked the door with shaking hands, gripping the key so tightly the metal dug into her palm. She backed away slowly, as if fearing the walls might shift or whisper. When she finally stepped out onto the street, the air felt colder, sharper, more dangerous. She didn't know yet what she had uncovered, but she understood one thing. Someone else knew too. Someone who wasn't ready to let the past stay buried. Someone who wanted what was hidden beneath those boards. As twilight stretched across the sky like a dark veil, Elena realized the truth. She had entered a story far older and far darker than she ever imagined, and the deeper she went, the harder it would be to escape. As night settled fully across East Harbor Street, one thing became painfully clear. The secrets of Versailles had just begun to wake. After the sun rose behind a curtain of muted gray clouds, Elena returned to the restaurant with the heavy knowledge of what she had uncovered and the heavier fear of what she had heard above her the day before. Her hands trembled only slightly as she unlocked the door, but her mind felt sharper now, clearer, as if purpose had burned away the fog of confusion. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, listening for anything unusual. The air was still, too still. Not a whisper of movement, not a shift in the wood, not even the gentle creak of settling beams. But silence could be deceptive. She moved cautiously across the room until she reached the uneven floorboard once more. This was where her world had cracked open, where innocence had ended, where truth had first breathed against her spine. She crouched and pressed her fingertips to the board, feeling the faint vibrations of memory, the shock of finding money, the burn of the ledger's words, the terror of those footsteps that had no face and no mercy. But this morning she wasn't here to hide from the mystery. She was here to confront it. With steady breath, she lifted the board again, exposing the dark chamber below. The cold air rose like a whisper against her skin. She lowered herself into the space once more, flashlight guiding her descent. The hidden chamber greeted her with its quiet chill, the stored containers standing like silent witnesses to a crime long buried. She placed the flashlight on one of the crates and pulled out several bundles of old cash again, counting them quickly. This was no small stash. This wasn't forgotten pocket change. This was life-changing money, life-saving money, money that should have pulled its owner out of darkness, not buried him deeper into it. She set the bundles aside and inspected another crate, prying it open to reveal metal tins sealed with heavy tape. The labels were faded, smudged beyond recognition. When she knocked gently against one, it echoed with an unsettling metallic ring, not empty, not filled with grain or spices. Something dense, something valuable. She swallowed, then turned her attention back to the locked steel trunk. It sat slightly crooked in the corner, burn marks etched along its hinges, as though someone had once attempted to destroy whatever it guarded. Elena brushed her fingers over the symbol on its lid, the two interlocking rings, simple yet ominous. Something about it tugged at her memory, like a half-forgotten detail she couldn't place. She gripped the lock, cold, immovable. She needed tools, stronger ones. As she climbed back up into the dining room, her foot brushed against something near the opening. She turned, frowning. A folded piece of paper lay there, half-tucked beneath the lifted floorboard. Her stomach dropped. That wasn't there before. She picked it up with careful fingers. The paper was older than anything she had touched in the restaurant, so far yellowed, edges brittle, faintly smelling of smoke. She unfolded it slowly, fearing what message it might carry. One line, written in frantic, uneven handwriting, he knows. The words slammed into her chest like a blow. She dropped the paper onto the table, her breath unraveling as she stepped backward. He knows. Who was he, and what did he know? Her mind flashed back to the footsteps above her yesterday, the measured pace, the heavy tread, the slow, intentional movement of someone not surprised to find unlocked mysteries, someone who had been watching this place, someone connected to the ledger, someone who had been waiting for the right time to return. Elena's pulse hammered as she scanned the room again, the windows, the hallway, the shadows. Every corner now looked deeper, darker, more capable of hiding something or someone. She moved toward the front door and locked it again, twisting the bolt until it clanked firmly in place. Then she returned to the paper, picking it up once more. The handwriting was desperate, slanted, the ink smudged as if written in haste. She flipped it over and noticed faint indentations on the back, traces of something written before it, faint enough to be invisible, but clear enough for her fingers to feel. She pressed the paper against the counter, smoothing it carefully, then held her flashlight at a shallow angle. The light caught the grooves, revealing a partial phrase etched into the fibers. "Don't let him find the rest." Her breath hitched. The rest of what? A cold realization tightened her chest. The money beneath the floor wasn't the only secret in this building. Something else was hidden, something bigger, something someone had risked their life to hide and maybe died for. Elena gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. She had come looking for a fresh start, a patch of hope in a life collapsing under the weight of bills and fear. Instead, she had inherited a labyrinth of dangers. "Stay calm," she whispered. "Focus." She walked back to the hollow section of the floor, staring at it with new eyes. Whoever left that note had wanted to warn someone, had wanted this secret to be protected. But protected from whom? Her mind reached again for the faint sound from yesterday. Someone inside. Someone searching. Someone determined. She felt heat climb through her chest. Fear, yes, but something stronger too. Determination. She had survived too much in life to walk away from truth now. She had a daughter to protect. If this building held danger, she needed to uncover every hidden corner before danger found them first. She kneels again, peering into the darkness below. This time, she saw something she hadn't noticed before, a faint glimmer beneath the metal trunk. Something metallic reflecting her flashlight. She lowered herself into the chamber once more, crawling toward the trunk with controlled breaths. The glimmer was subtle, disappearing when she moved the light too quickly. She shifted her angle. A key, small, rusted, wedged between two wood planks, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. She reached for it carefully, pulling it free with stiff fingers. The metal felt brittle but not broken. Could it be the key to the trunk? Only one way to know. She positioned herself in front of the trunk and inserted the key into the lock. It resisted at first, grinding as if reluctant to remember its purpose. She jiggled it gently. The metal scraped, groaned, clicked. Her heartbeat surged. The latch popped open with a sharp metallic snap. She hesitated, breathing deep, steadying her hands. Then she lifted the lid. Inside lay papers, documents, photographs, a rolled-up blueprint, a leather pouch sealed with wax, another notebook, smaller, darker, more worn than first. Her flashlight trembled as it illuminated each item. She lifted one of the photographs. A young man stood in the old restaurant kitchen, smiling as he held a pan over a stove. Flour dusted his apron. Another man stood beside him, older, with sharp eyes and a shadowed expression. The back of the photo was labeled, "Matteo and Lorenzo, 1999. Elena's breath caught. Matteo, the name from the ledger's initials, the missing owner, and Lorenzo, the brother mentioned in the news articles she vaguely remembered, the one rumored to have been tied to dangerous people. Her hands shook. She lifted another document, a newspaper clipping, crinkled and brittle with time. The headline read, Local chef missing Vasari's closes overnight. Her vision blurred for a moment, heart pounding as if each syllable was a hammer striking bone. She read the article quickly. Matteo Vasari vanished one night. Restaurant closed without warning. Family silent. Police baffled. Rumors of debts. Rumors of criminal ties. Rumors of money that disappeared with him. Rumors about this very building. She dropped the paper, chest tightening. Everything pointed to one truth: this restaurant hadn't been abandoned. It had been sealed like a tomb, to hide something, or someone. She reached for the second notebook, the darker one, and opened it carefully. The first page made her blood run cold. If you are reading this, it means I failed. Her breath froze. She leaned closer, reading the next line. The money beneath the floor is only the beginning. The blueprint holds the real secret. The syndicate will come for it, and my brother, he will not forgive betrayal. Her pulse pounded louder. She flipped the page. Do not trust anyone who searches this place. Do not trust any man in a dark coat. Her heart lurched. The footsteps, the moved ledger, the note left on the floor. Someone had already come, already searched, already watched. She read the final line written on the open page. If you value your life, leave now. But Elena didn't close the notebook. She didn't climb out. She didn't run. She wasn't built to run. Her daughter depended on her, and this secret, whatever it was, threatened everything she was trying to protect. She lifted the rolled blueprint from the trunk and carried it up into the dining room, unfurling it across a table. Lines, measurements, walls, hidden compartments, markings beneath the building, something labeled Vault Room B. Her legs weakened. There was more, much more. Another chamber beneath the restaurant, deeper, larger, sealed. The money she had found was nothing compared to what lay further below. A soft crack echoed from the hallway. Elena stiffened. Someone was inside, again. Her breath caught. Her muscles tightened. The air thinned. Then a silhouette shifted at the edge of the cracked doorway. Tall, still, watching her. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She recognized the outline, the dark coat, the rigid posture, the same figure she glimpsed the night she bought the restaurant. Lorenzo. Her stomach dropped. He stepped forward, silence stretching. Elena took one small step back. The truth beneath the floor had awakened, and the man tied to its darkest secrets had finally come for her. As the room dimmed around her, she realized the story was only beginning. The restaurant held its breath, the dust suspended in the air between Elena and the dark silhouette, wet as if waiting for one of them to shatter the silence first. The man in the long dark coat stood framed in the dim hallway light, his presence sharp and heavy like a shadow pulled into human form. Elena's fingers curled instinctively around the edge of the table where the blueprint lay unfurled. The paper trembled beneath her hand. Her voice stayed locked in her throat, trapped somewhere between fear and disbelief. The man stepped forward, not rushing, not threatening, simply walking with the deliberate calm of someone who had already measured the room, already mapped the exits, already decided exactly how this encounter would go. His boots tapped softly against the old floorboards, each step echoing with a patience far more dangerous than anger. Elena swallowed hard. He stopped a few feet from her, dim evening light falling across his face at last. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, a calm expression that didn't match the tension thrumming through the air. He didn't look like a stranger. He looked like someone who belonged here, and that made him infinitely more frightening. "You found it," he said quietly, his voice smooth, almost tired. "I figured you would." Elena tried to keep her breathing steady. Who are you?" He glanced around the room, his gaze drifting from the lifted floorboard to the ledger on the table, to the blueprint she had spread out, the blueprint she suddenly wished she had never touched. "I'm someone who knows this place better than anyone," he said. "Better than you. Better than the city. Better than the people who came before you." His eyes locked onto hers. "Better than my brother ever did." The word hit her like a blow. Brother. Her blood ran cold. She barely whispered. Lorenzo Vasari. He finished. The name slid into the air like a blade. Elena stepped back instinctively, her pulse roaring in her ears. The photo from the trunk flashed through her mind, two brothers in a kitchen, one smiling, one shadowed. Now she knew which one stood before her. Lorenzo glanced toward the open floorboard, chest rising slowly, as if decades of buried memories were seeping out from the darkness below. "You weren't meant to find any of this," he said softly. "No one was." Elena's hands trembled. Then why was it here? Why bury something like this under the floor? He let out a quiet breath, the corner of his mouth tightening, because Matteo trusted the wrong people. And when he realized it, it was already too late. His words weren't laced with sorrow. They carried something heavier, a bitterness that had aged poorly. Elena clenched her fists. "If you know what happened, then why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you tell the police? Why didn't you tell them what?" He cut in sharply, stepping closer. "That my brother stole from men who don't forgive, and that he died trying to run from them. That the fortune they were hunting ended up in a hole under rotting floorboards. That the man they were looking for simply vanished." His voice trembled for the first time, anger flickering beneath it like heat rising from coals. "Or should I tell them," he continued, "that the same men are still watching this place, waiting for the moment it opens again?" Elena's breath snagged, still watching, still waiting. Her mind jumped instantly to the footsteps above her the day before, the note, the moved ledger, the unease that had crept along her spine. "You were here yesterday." She whispered, "No." His answer came quickly, firmly, "But someone else was." The room tilted slightly. Fear tightened around her ribs like a vise. He took another step, his posture tense but not yet violent. "You shouldn't have opened anything," he said, his voice low. "You don't understand what you've stepped into." Elena lifted her chin despite the fear shaking her bones. "I didn't step into anything. I bought a building at an auction, that's all." Lorenzo's eyes darkened. "No, that's where you're wrong. You didn't buy a building. You walked into a grave." The words chilled her blood. He stared at her for a long moment, measuring her resolve, weighing her presence, deciding something she couldn't read in his expression. Then his gaze dropped to the blueprint. He reached out slowly and touched the corner of it. Elena flinched. He paused, raising an eyebrow. "If I wanted to hurt you," he said quietly, "I wouldn't be wasting time talking. Trust me on that." She hated how her stomach twisted at his calmness. He unrolled the blueprint further with the back of his knuckles, revealing another section of the structure: underground chambers, hidden corridors, markings she hadn't deciphered yet. Elena's voice broke. "What is all of this?" His jaw clenched. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is everything Matteo died trying to protect." Silence pressed in again, heaviness pooling in the cracks of the room. Elena tried to breathe through it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why hide all of this in a restaurant?" Lorenzo exhaled slowly, turning his gaze to the far corner of the room where the tiles had cracked longest ago. His tone dropped lower, almost hollow, because this was the only place he trusted. He said, "His dream. His sanctuary, his curse." His voice faltered just once. Then he added, "And because he thought I would find it one day, he thought I could fix what he broke." A bitter laugh escaped him. He never imagined a stranger would uncover it first. Elena shook her head, stepping away as fear and defiance battled inside her. "I didn't want any of this. I didn't ask for it. I just needed a home." Lorenzo's eyes softened just enough to show he believed her. "That doesn't matter now," he said. "The moment you touched those floorboards, your life became tied to his." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to be tied to anything," she whispered. "You don't have a choice." The bluntness cut deep. He reached into his coat, and Elena stiffened, but he pulled out nothing more than a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table between them, a faded envelope sealed decades ago, Matteo's name written across the front. "You should read it," Lorenzo said. He left it in the trunk, probably for me, but I think... He hesitated. I think he meant for someone else to see it first. Elena's fingers hovered over the envelope. She didn't touch it. Lorenzo stepped back, his figure retreating toward the exit, as if his presence had completed its purpose for now. He paused by the door, resting his hand on the handle. His final words were barely above a murmur. "You're in danger, Elena, and so is your daughter. Whatever you choose next, choose it fast." He slipped into the dim corridor beyond, swallowed by shadow, leaving the door slightly ajar. The silence that followed felt heavier than his presence. Elena stood alone at the table, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope Matteo had left behind. She stared at his name, the faded ink, the fragile paper holding secrets older than her problems, older than her struggles, older than her hope. She felt the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing against her spine. Slowly, with a breath unsteady and thin, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. Handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the first line was clear. "If someone finds this, please finish what I could not." Elena felt her heart fracture into both fear and fate. The restaurant wasn't done with her, and as the room dimmed into early night, she realized the story was only beginning. After Lorenzo's warning drained into the silence of the abandoned restaurant, Elena stood frozen in the dim light, clutching Matteo's letter as if it were a fragile bridge between her world and the one she had stepped into without meaning to. The air felt colder now, thick with the weight of secrets that had slept for decades and were no longer willing to stay silent. Morning crept slowly across the windows, brushing the dust with pale gold, but the light did nothing to soften the fear clawing at her ribs. Her fingers trembled as she ran them along Matteo's uneven handwriting. "Finish what I could not." The words sat like coals in her palm, burning through every layer of denial she had tried to build. Since the first day she walked into this place, she had wanted a fresh start, a roof, a chance, a place to rebuild her life. Instead, she had been handed the remains of a man's last desperate act. She took a slow breath and forced herself to read the letter again from the beginning. Matteo's voice, broken, frightened, and determined, spilled from the page with a weight she could feel pressing against her chest. "If someone finds this, then the choices I made have finally caught up to me. I never meant for any of this. I never meant to be part of them, but once you take their money, you belong to them. I hid what I could. I prayed Lorenzo would stay away, but he's too loyal, too stubborn. He will come looking. If you found the chamber, know that it's not the only one. There is more, and they will kill to reclaim it." Elena's hands shook harder with every line. She closed her eyes, swallowing the rising panic. There was more than the crates, more than the trunk, more than the money that already felt impossibly large. Another chamber, another secret, another danger. Her breath shallow, Elena folded the letter and slipped it carefully into her jacket. She paced the dining room slowly, her boots whispering across the dusty floor. Each step felt heavier. The air felt wrong, like the walls themselves were leaning closer, listening, waiting. She moved to the table where the blueprint sat, unfurled like an old, sleeping ghost. The edges fluttered with the soft draft from the cracked window. She pressed her hands against the paper, smoothing it, tracing the lines Matteo had drawn decades ago. There beneath the building's main floor was a symbol she had missed the night before. A small X, tucked into the blueprint's lower corner, tiny, deliberate, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Her breath caught. A second chamber, not beneath the dining room, not beneath the kitchen. But beneath the storage hallway, the same hallway where she had found the wooden box, the ledger, the old jars and forgotten tools, the hallway she hadn't fully explored, a chill rippled down her spine. She grabbed her flashlight and headed that way, moving past the host stand, past the dusty booths, past the overturned chairs. The hallway stretched long and narrow, its faded wallpaper peeling in strips like tired skin, revealing the bones beneath. She stepped carefully, listening for anything unusual, any shift, any whisper, any sign that Lorenzo or someone else might have returned. But the silence felt unbroken for now. Halfway down the hallway, she stopped. The blueprint's mark burned in her mind. The floor here felt different, the boards laid in a slightly tighter pattern, the seams narrower, the surface smoother than the rest. It was subtle, but compared to the uneven boards in the dining room, this section felt too perfect, too intentional. She crouched, running her fingertips along the floor, there a faint indent, a hairline slit she hadn't noticed before, almost invisible under the dust. She took a slow breath and pressed her palm against it. A hollow echo answered. Her heart thumped. This was it, the second chamber. Her flashlight shook as she set it on the floor and reached for her crowbar. She slid the metal tip into the narrow seam and pressed down gently. The wood resisted at first, tight with age, sealed for years. Then a soft groan, a shift. The board lifted slightly. Elena's pulse surged. She pried again, harder this time, until the corner came free. Dust spiraled into the air. Wood splintered softly, and then the board came loose enough for her to lift it fully. A wider opening than the first chamber revealed itself, deeper, darker, colder. A wave of air rose from below, carrying with it the scent of old metal, damp concrete, and something else, something almost chemical. Her chest tightened. She aimed her flashlight down, not crates, not money, not documents, a metal door, embedded in the ground like a vault hatch, round, sealed, thick, bolted shut with an industrial lock. Her stomach clenched. This wasn't a simple hiding spot. This was deliberate architecture, a vault meant to protect something far more dangerous than money. She reached down carefully, her fingertips brushing the cold metal surface. Rust bit at her skin. The door was heavy, impossibly heavy. She tried pulling on the handle, but it didn't budge, locked, buried, untouched for decades. Her flashlight beam slid across the hatch until she noticed something carved faintly into the metal, the same symbol she saw on the trunk. 2 interlocking rings. Her breath lodged in her throat. This wasn't just Matteo's hiding place. This was connected to the people he feared, the syndicate, the men who owned him, the men he betrayed. Her hand trembled as she pulled back from the opening. Was Lorenzo searching for this? Was this what he meant when he said the danger didn't end with the money? Was someone else looking for it too? She stared into the darkness below, every instinct screaming at her to leave it shut. But Matteo's words wouldn't let her walk away. Finish what I could not. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly, pressing her shaking palms against her knees. She needed something to break the lock, tools, a hammer, a chisel, something stronger. Something she didn't have with her yet. She climbed out of the hallway, her boots scraping against the floorboards as she wiped the dust from her hands. Her lungs fought for steady air, her thoughts spiraling between fear, urgency, and a streak of determination that surprised even her. When she stepped back into the dining room, she found herself staring again at the blueprint the secret Matteo had tried to leave behind, the truth that someone else would kill to reclaim. A faint sound slipped through the silence. A scrape along the window. Elena froze, not the wind, not the building settling, something outside. She moved cautiously toward the boarded window, her footsteps soft, barely disturbing the dust. She stopped just short of it, listening. A second scrape. then a whisper of motion. Her breath trembled as she peeked through the small crack where the boards didn't align. A figure stood across the street, not Lorenzo, taller, heavier, face hidden beneath a cap. Hands in his pockets, standing unnaturally still, watching. Elena stepped back instantly, heart slamming against her ribs. Another person, another threat, another piece of the past clawing its way into her present. She moved away from the window, each step slower than the last, as if trying not to wake the danger that was already awake and watching her every move. Her gaze returned to the hallway where the vault door waited beneath the floorboards. Her life had become a crossroads she couldn't escape. The money was nothing, the first chamber was nothing, the blueprints were nothing, compared to whatever waited behind that rusted metal door. She closed her eyes, gripping the edges of the blueprint until her knuckles whitened. The decision was no longer hers. The story had claimed her, and as the shadows deepened across the abandoned restaurant, Elena realized she had only opened the first door. The ones that followed would be far harder to close. And as night crept in like a tide of dark, she knew the story was only beginning. After the figure vanished from the street outside, the silence inside the restaurant became heavier, almost suffocating. Elena stood in the dimness, her back pressed against the wall, breath trembling as if the shadows themselves were drawing it from her lungs. The floor beneath her felt unsteady, as though the building sensed her fear and shifted beneath her weight. She forced herself to move. Fear could freeze her, but fear wouldn't protect Marina. Fear wouldn't answer Matteo's unfinished warning. Fear wouldn't unlock the truth hiding beneath this place. She stepped closer to the table, gripping the edge to steady herself. The blueprint lay open, its faded lines illuminated by the thin beam of late afternoon light sliding through a cracked window. She traced the outline of the vault door again, that small X, marking the exact place where danger and revelation intersected. Her pulse steadied. She couldn't stop now, even if someone was out there, even if Lorenzo returned, even if the past was clawing toward her with impatient hands. She had to know what Matteo died for and what people were still willing to kill for. But she also knew she couldn't break into the vault with the flimsy tools she had. She needed something stronger, something made from metal, not wood. Her eyes drifted toward the bar counter, then the back hallway where she had seen scattered pieces of old equipment. She remembered seeing a rusted toolbox on a shelf in the storage room earlier, one she had avoided because of the heavy scent of mold emanating from it. Now she needed it. She walked the length of the hallway again, flashlight cutting through the deepening shadows as she pushed open the storage room door. The musty smell wrapped around her instantly, thick and stale. Dust clung to her hair as she ducked under the low-hanging shelves. There on the floor near the back sat the old red toolbox, its metal sides dented and spotted with rust. She dragged it forward, the scrape echoing in the narrow room. It felt heavier than she expected. She flipped open the lid. Inside lay a collection of tools that belonged to another era. A thick steel hammer, a heavy chisel, an old wrench, a crowbar much sturdier than her own. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, imagining Matteo lifting these same tools years ago, using them to hide, protect, conceal. Her throat tightened. She grabbed the hammer and chisel, then paused. Another item sat tucked into the corner of the toolbox, wrapped in cloth, fragile, looking forgotten. She unwrapped it carefully. A small brass key, old, decorative, delicate compared to everything else in the box. Her pulse quickened. Could this be for the vault? She slipped the key into her pocket, took the heavier tools, and made her way back to the hidden opening in the hallway floor. The boards she had pried up earlier still sat neatly to the side, exposing the dark mouth of the second chamber. Her hands trembled as she lowered herself again into the cold underground space. The air felt different this time, thicker, as though it sensed her purpose. The flashlight beam flickered across the vault door, the symbol of interlocking rings glowing faintly with dust. She crouched before it, setting the tools down beside her. The handle of the vault was cold enough to sting when she touched it. She exhaled slowly and reached into her pocket for the brass key. It slid into the small keyhole with surprising ease. For a moment she hesitated. If she turned this key, she knew nothing would be the same again. It was a threshold, a point of no return. Her breath shook, but she turned it anyway. A soft click echoed through the chamber. The lock released. Her heart stumbled. She gripped the handle and pulled. The metal groaned, resisting at first, then giving way with a long, tortured creak. The vault door cracked open, releasing a cold gust of air that smelled of concrete, age, and something darker, something metallic and bitter, like old blood and secrets that had no name. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears as she pushed the door wider. Her flashlight cut into the darkness. Her breath hitched. It wasn't money. It wasn't crates. It wasn't documents. It was a room. A hidden chamber carved from reinforced concrete. Walls lined with old filing cabinets, metal shelves, and lockers. In the center sat a single steel table, covered in dust and scattered with objects that made her skin prickle, a pile of coded ledgers, sealed envelopes marked with symbols she couldn't decipher, and thick stacks of photographs. Photographs of people, of buildings, of transactions, of meetings held in dim corners, evidence, too much evidence, evidence that could destroy powerful men, evidence Matteo had been collecting. Her pulse roared. She stepped inside cautiously, the floor cold beneath her boots. Her flashlight swept over the cabinets, all labeled in faded marker. Finances, operations, ledgers, commissions, night routes. The vault wasn't meant to store money. The vault was meant to store the truth. Her fingers brushed against the nearest drawer. She pulled it open. Stacks of papers, receipts, names, dates, amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through the shadows of the city. Her breath trembled. This wasn't just a stash. This was a map of a criminal empire. Her stomach twisted as her eyes caught another folder, one labeled Vasari. She grabbed it, pulling it open with shaking hands. Inside lay records tied to Matteo's name, transactions he never made, debts he never owed, threats written in coded phrases that only those within the syndicate would understand. The last page was a single sheet with a short message scrawled at the bottom. He knows you're planning to run. The room blurred around her. Matteo hadn't just been hiding money. He had been gathering evidence, real evidence, to bring the entire syndicate down. But they had found out. They had cornered him. They had forced him to vanish. And he had hidden everything here, hoping someone would find it one day. Not Lorenzo, not the syndicate, someone else, someone unconnected. Someone desperate enough to pry up the floorboards. Elena. Her breath cracked in the cold air. She reached for another cabinet, opening drawer after drawer, mind spinning as she tried to piece together the scope of what she was seeing. This vault wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. A rustling sound sliced through the underground silence. Elena froze, not from the hallway, not from above, from inside the vault. She lifted her flashlight, heart pounding violently. The beam landed on the back corner of the chamber. A stack of boxes had shifted. She stepped closer slowly, forcing each breath to be silent. She pulled one box aside. Behind it lay something she hadn't expected. A door, small, hidden, barely visible behind the metal shelving. A third chamber. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. But before she could touch it, a sharp bang echoed from above. Her entire body jerked. Footsteps, fast, heavy, moving across the dining room, moving toward the hallway. Someone was inside. Someone who knew where to go. Someone who wasn't Lorenzo. Elena scrambled out of the vault chamber, heart racing so hard her vision blurred. She climbed through the floor opening, pulling herself into the hallway. A shadow loomed at the far end, tall, broad-shouldered, pacing forward with purpose. She stumbled back, pulse screaming in her ears. The man stepped into the thin light falling across the hallway. Not Lorenzo, someone colder, someone she had never seen before, someone whose eyes carried the weight of a predator who had tracked his prey for a long, long time. His voice slid down the hallway like a slow blade. "You shouldn't have opened that." Elena stepped back, shaking. Her mind didn't fully grasp his words, only the danger behind them. He stepped closer, boots echoing off the hollow floor. "You don't know what you've taken," he said softly. "You don't know who you've provoked." Her back hit the wall, her breath shook. He raised a gloved hand. "Matteo hid more than money," he said, "and now, you belong to the same fate he did." Elena's heart collapsed into fear. The vault door below her still hung open. The second chamber waited beneath her feet. And this man, whoever he was here to claim it all. She had stepped into a war older than her struggles, larger than her desperation, deeper than the floorboards she lifted. And as the man took another step, his shadow stretching across her like a promise of violence after the stranger's shadow spilled into the hallway, Elena's pulse slammed so violently against her ribs she felt the thud echo through her fingertips. The air thickened around her, squeezing the space between them until it felt like there was no oxygen left to breathe. The man stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle like dust between old bones. His posture was patient, too patient, the kind of stillness that belongs to someone who has waited a long time to finally corner what they were hunting. Elena didn't dare blink. The faint drip somewhere in the plumbing echoed softly. The boards beneath her feet creaked as though warning her not to move. Not yet. Not until she understood who or what she was dealing with. He stepped forward again, slow and measured, like a predator choosing the exact moment to strike. His coat brushed softly against his legs. His boots pressed into the wood with a deliberate weight that made the hallway tremble, and his eyes, cold, dark, unreadable, never left hers. "I'll say this once," he murmured, voice low, steady, terrifyingly calm. "Move away from the hole." The words crawled down her spine like a spider with ice-cold legs. He wasn't asking. He was giving an order. Elena swallowed the fear burning up her throat. "What do you want?" One corner of his mouth twitched, but not in amusement. The expression was too controlled for any real emotion. "I want what's mine." Her stomach clenched. "I don't have anything of yours. You do." His voice sharpened slightly. "You just don't understand it yet." He stepped closer. She stepped back. The old restaurant seemed to shrink around them, the walls drawing in like lungs exhaling their last breath. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as a beam shifted overhead, the entire building sensing danger, as if its very bones remembered the violence of the past. Elena's breaths grew quicker, harder to control. "I'm not part of whatever this is. I didn't know anything was under the floor. You knew when you opened it," he cut in, "and you knew again when you opened the vault." Her blood froze. He knew she had been inside. He knew she had found Matteo's evidence. He knew she had touched secrets that weren't meant for her. And now he had come to take them or silence the one who found them. He walked toward her again, steps quieter this time, more calculated. "Matteo should have destroyed everything, but he didn't, and you've made the same mistake he did thinking you could control something that was never meant to be touched." Elena's throat tightened painfully. "Matteo didn't leave it there to be destroyed." "No," the man replied, pausing just steps away. "Matteo left it for someone with enough spine to continue his work, and enough desperation to open a floorboard without asking the right questions." His eyes narrowed. "But that someone wasn't supposed to be you." His tone carried a subtle edge, disappointment, irritation, but beneath it simmered something more dangerous, certainty. He already knew what he planned to do next. Elena's heart pounded with frantic clarity. She needed distance. She needed air. She needed time. She darted to the side, a sudden desperate movement, and lunged toward the dining room. The man reacted instantly, his hand shooting out to grab the back of her jacket. She ripped free, stumbling forward, catching the edge of a table as momentum nearly sent her crashing into the floor. Her lungs choked on air. The man straightened calmly. Running won't help. She grabbed the first object she could, a broken chair leg, and pointed it toward him like a frail weapon. Her hand shook violently. His brow lifted ever so slightly. "You think you can stop me with that?" Elena's grip tightened. "Stay back." For the first time, something flickered across his face, not fear, not hesitation, but annoyance that she dared resist. "I tried to be civil," he said quietly, "but you're making this difficult." His hand dipped into his coat. Elena's chest collapsed in panic. She bolted. Her feet pounded across the restaurant floor, splinters biting into her palms as she pushed herself over debris, ducking beneath beams, weaving between broken tables. The air whipped past her in ragged bursts as she ran toward the front door. She didn't look back, but she heard him, his boots thudding behind her, measured, relentless, hungry. Elena reached the entrance, fumbling with the lock. Her fingers slipped, sweat blurred her vision, the handle stuck. Then a hand slammed against the door just inches from her own. She gasped and spun away, darting behind the counter. Her breath trembled uncontrollably. His shadow stretched across the room as he rounded the last booth. "You're wasting both our time," he called. His calmness made everything worse. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't threatened. He wasn't struggling. He was hunting. Elena crouched beneath the counter, heart pounding like a terrified drum. She crawled backward, her hands scraping across shattered glass and dust, reaching for anything to defend herself. Her fingers brushed metal, the crowbar. She gripped it tightly, forcing herself to breathe through the rising terror. His footsteps were close now, too close. She could hear the slight shift of his coat, the quiet exhale as he moved past a table. She tightened her grip. 2 more steps. 1 more. He stopped directly in front of the counter. Elena held her breath until her chest burned. Then he stepped around the side. In one motion, she burst from hiding and swung the crowbar with all her strength. The metal connected. He staggered backward, hitting a table with a deep grunt. Elena didn't stay to watch him recover. She sprinted toward the back of the building, into the kitchen. Her pulse roared, her body shook, her legs burned with panic. She slammed the kitchen door behind her and shoved a heavy crate in front of it. The hinges rattled under the sudden force. For a few breathless seconds, she allowed herself to believe she had created enough distance. But then, a soft, calm knock. 3 times. Her blood froze solid. "Elena," the man said through the door, voice low and eerily steady. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be." She backed away until her spine hit the refrigerator. A breath shaky, a second, a third. He knocked again. "You've found something that doesn't belong to you. Something dangerous, something powerful. I'm here to take it back." She shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "I won't let you. You don't have a choice." The hinges whined, metal strained, the crate began to shift. Elena's pulse exploded. She spun around, searching for another exit, a window, a back door, anything. There, near the far end of the kitchen, a narrow service door, rusted, cracked. She sprinted toward it, shoving against the metal until it scraped open with a painful screech. Outside, cold air slapped her face. Behind her, the kitchen door finally gave, wood cracked, hinges snapped. His footsteps entered the kitchen. Elena ran. She tore down the alley behind the restaurant, boots slipping on wet pavement. Shadows stretched long across the brick walls. Her breath puffed in frantic clouds. The alley opened onto a side street. Traffic hummed in the distance, but the road here was empty, a ghost corridor of forgotten buildings. She didn't stop. Not until she reached the far corner. Not until she pressed herself against a brick wall, chest heaving, head spinning. She peeked around the corner. Nothing. No footsteps. No shadow. No chasing figure. But his voice lingered in her ears like a curse. You've taken something that doesn't belong to you. You don't know who you've provoked. You belong to the same fate he did. Her legs buckled. She slid down the wall and pressed a trembling hand against her forehead, trying to breathe through the rising wave of panic. The truth settled in like ice. This wasn't just a hidden stash. This wasn't just old evidence. This wasn't just history. This was war, and she had become part of it. Not by choice, but by lifting a single floorboard. As the night deepened around her and the cold seeped through her clothes, Elena realized something with terrifying clarity. Someone else wanted the fortune back, and someone else wanted the secrets buried. And both sides believed Elena Ramirez had become a problem they intended to fix. And in the crushing darkness of that alley, trembling and breathless, Elena understood one undeniable truth. After the alley swallowed her trembling breath, Elena stayed hidden in the shadows until her pulse softened from a frantic roar to a painful throb. The cold seeped deep into her bones, but she didn't dare move. Not yet. Not while her mind replayed every moment she had just survived, every step, every chase, every word the stranger had thrown like sharp stones against the fear pulsing inside her. She pressed her back flat to the wall, trying to steady herself. The night wrapped around her like a cloak of damp silence, brittle and thin. Streetlights flickered lazily, humming with an indifferent glow. In the distance, a car engine rumbled before fading into the soft lull of traffic, but here, where East Harbor met the forgotten back streets, time seemed to freeze. Her breaths grew shallower, tighter, more uneven. She wasn't just afraid. She was discovering the cost of lifting secrets that weren't meant to breathe in daylight. Finally, after long minutes of stillness, she pushed herself up from the cold pavement. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she forced her body to move one step, then another, carrying her out of the alley and toward the dim edge of the main road. She needed to get home. She needed to get to Marina. She needed to think clearly, safely, away from the shadow of the man who had almost cornered her. Her boots struck the pavement in rhythmic, shaky steps as she headed toward the bus stop 2 blocks away. She kept glancing over her shoulder, scanning for movement, for silhouettes stretching where they shouldn't, for the quiet echo of footsteps behind her. Nothing, not yet, but the silence felt like a lie. When she reached the bus stop, she kept her back pressed against the shelter's metal frame so no one could approach from behind. Every passing car made her flinch. Every figure across the street made her lungs tighten. When the bus finally arrived, she boarded quickly, slipping into a seat near the window. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched as the city blurred past neon signs, shuttered shops, tired faces drifting through the night. She clutched her bag to her chest. Inside were the tools she had used to open the vault, the brass key, and Mateo's letter. That letter felt heavier now, not just a warning, but a prophecy she had stepped directly into. You don't know who you've provoked. The stranger's voice crawled through her mind like oil. She closed her eyes. If she had provoked someone, that meant someone else was watching. Someone else cared about the vault. Someone else had a stake in the secrets Mateo left behind. And that brought her back to the most chilling thought of all. The man in the alley had known her name. He wasn't just a threat. He was informed, prepared, and he had been waiting. Her bus rattled to a stop, and she forced herself to get off, her legs carrying her down the quiet street toward the apartment where Marina waited. The lamplight spilled across the cracked sidewalk, painting long shadows that swayed in the gentle wind like uneasy silhouettes. When she reached the door, her hands hesitated on the knob. She took a breath, held it, listened for anything off, any whisper of danger lurking behind her, any rustle in the bushes, any flicker of movement from the street. Only silence. She entered quietly. Marina's soft breathing drifted from the bedroom, steady and soothing. Elena leaned against the doorframe, watching her daughter curled up peacefully beneath the thin blanket. A wave of emotion crashed through her: relief, protectiveness, dread. Everything she had discovered today. Everything she had awakened beneath the restaurant. Everything she now carried on her shoulders, all of it, threatened this small, precious world she was fighting so desperately to preserve. She moved silently into the bathroom, turning on the faint overhead light. Her reflection stared back at her through the cracked mirror, pale, dust-streaked, eyes trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. Slowly, she pulled Matteo's letter from her jacket. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "What did you get yourself into, Matteo?" But she knew the answer. The vault wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just a confession. It was leverage. Leverage powerful enough to destroy a syndicate. Leverage powerful enough to kill for. Leverage powerful enough to come crawling out of the past the moment she disturbed it. And she was now tied to that leverage, whether she wanted to be or not. Her hands shook as she folded the letter and returned it to her bag. She stepped into the small kitchen, turned off the light and slid onto the couch, pulling a thin throw blanket over her shoulders. She didn't sleep for a long time. Her ears strained for even the faintest sound outside: the crunch of gravel, the quiet whisper of footsteps, the hum of an engine that idled too long. Hours passed. Then, at last, her exhaustion overpowered fear, pulling her into a shallow, restless sleep. She didn't sleep long. A sharp banging jolted her awake. Her heart leapt into her throat. She sat up instantly, disoriented, breath burning in her lungs. Another knock, harder, urgent. Her pulse thundered painfully as she crept toward the window, peering cautiously through the blinds. Her blood ran cold. A figure stood outside, tall, still, wearing a dark coat. For a moment, panic clawed up her throat. The stranger had found her. He had followed her home. But then the figure stepped into the glow of the porch light. Lorenzo. Her breath caught in confusion, not relief, not fear, but a tangled knot of both. He raised his eyes toward the window, not threatening, not aggressive, just, fixed, determined. Hands were visible. "Empty, Elena." His voice murmured through the glass, quiet but firm. "Open up." She hesitated. Every instinct fought itself, one screaming to keep him out, the other insisting she needed answers only he could provide. After a long breath, she opened the door just barely, enough for his face to appear between the crack. His expression was taut, shadowed with frustration and something else, something troubled. "You shouldn't have run," he said. She swallowed hard. "He was trying to kill me, I know." Her heart lurched. "So you saw him?" Lorenzo shook his head slowly. "Not tonight. But I know exactly who he is." Elena stiffened. "Who?" For a moment, Lorenzo hesitated, a rare flicker of something vulnerable crossing his gaze. Then he said the name like a grave that had been sealed too long. Darian Corvo. The name meant nothing to her, but the weight of it hit her like a stone dropped into deep water. Lorenzo's voice dropped lower. "He isn't part of the police. He isn't part of any agency. He isn't part of any world you want near you." "Then what is he?" Elena whispered. "A collector," Lorenzo said quietly, "of debts, of secrets, of people who cross the syndicate." His eyes darkened. "And if he's here, then he's already decided you're a problem." A cold shiver cut through Elena. "He wants the vault," she said, voice breaking. "No." Lorenzo stepped closer. "He wants everything your hands touched." Her breath stilled. Lorenzo exhaled, his jaw tight. "You're in deeper than you understand, Elena. Matteo hid something in that vault that makes the money look like spare change." something they've been hunting for decades. Elena felt the room tilt around her. "What is it?" she whispered. Lorenzo shook his head. "Not here, not with him watching." She blinked, watching. Lorenzo's eyes flicked to the dark street behind her. Dread chilled her blood. "Elena," he said softly, voice low and urgent. "Pack what you need. Wake your daughter. You can't stay here anymore." Her chest tightened. "Why?" Lorenzo stepped back, scanning the shadows beyond the porch. "Because Darian Corvo doesn't knock twice." Elena's breath shook. The night deepened around them, dense and foreboding. Her life, Marina's life, had just crossed a threshold that could never be undone. And as she turned toward the dim apartment, rushing to gather the only things that mattered, she understood a truth sharper than fear. The story was only beginning. After the warning slipped from Lorenzo's lips, Darian Corvo doesn't knock twice. Elena felt the ground beneath her life tilt into a terrifying new direction. The air in the apartment sharpened, heavy and electric, as though the walls themselves realized danger had already found their address. She didn't argue, she didn't question, she moved. Her heartbeat thrummed violently in her ears as she rushed into the bedroom, reaching for Marina with trembling hands. The little girl blinked awake, confused, her soft voice thick with sleep. "Mom, what's wrong?" Elena forced her fear down, pressing a shaking kiss to Marina's forehead. "We're leaving, sweetheart, right now." "Why?" Marina asked, eyes widening. Elena swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Because we have to." She helped Marina throw on her jacket, her small hands fumbling with the zipper, still half-asleep. Elena grabbed the backpack from the corner of the room, the one she kept packed for emergencies she hoped would never come, and slipped the notebook, Matteo's letter, and the brass key inside. Every second pulsed with danger. She could feel it in the walls, in the night, in the silence outside that felt too concentrated, too expectant. When she returned to the living room, Lorenzo stood at the door, scanning the hallway through the peephole. His posture was rigid, coiled with the tension of someone who had lived far too long with enemies. "Is he out there?" Elena whispered. "No," Lorenzo murmured, "but he was." Her stomach twisted. "Then he knows where we live. He knew before tonight." The truth cut deeper than any threat. Lorenzo motioned toward the door. "We need to move, now." Elena grabbed Marina's hand tightly. The door opened to the cool hallway, and for a moment the fluorescent lights flickered overhead like a warning pulse. The silence felt unnatural, neither safe nor empty, but waiting. They walked briskly down the stairs, each step echoing like distant gunshots in the narrow stairwell. Elena kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see a shadow break away from the wall, expecting Darian Corvo to emerge with that calm, predator's steady expression. But the building remained quiet. When they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them like a dark tide. The street was empty, too empty. Lorenzo scanned everything: rooftops, alley mouths, the darkened bus stopped down the block, the passing sweep of headlights from distant traffic. "Stay close," he murmured, leading them toward a narrow side street where an old sedan sat parked beneath a flickering lamp. Marina clung to Elena's arm. "Mom, are we in trouble?" Elena stroked her daughter's hair gently, even though her hands shook. "No, baby, we're just being careful." But careful no longer felt like enough. Lorenzo unlocked the car and motioned them inside. Elena slid into the back seat with Marina, pulling her close, shielding her with her arms. The moment the doors shut, Lorenzo started the engine without turning on the headlights. The car eased away from the curb like a ghost slipping through the night. Elena's voice cracked. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere he won't look first," Lorenzo said. "Somewhere safe for now." "For now," Elena whispered. Lorenzo didn't answer. The car moved through the empty streets, weaving through back roads Elena had rarely seen. Every so often Lorenzo checked the mirror, his jaw tightening with a silent calculation. After several minutes, Marina's tired voice broke the tension. "Who's that man, Mom? The one who scared us?" Elena hesitated. Before she could answer, Lorenzo spoke quietly, not harshly, but with a blunt honesty that made Elena's heart sink. "He's someone who hurts people for money, and he's looking for something your mom found." Marina's small fingers tightened around Elena's sleeve. "Mom didn't do anything wrong." "I know," Lorenzo said, eyes fixed on the road. "But Darian doesn't care who's right or wrong." The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Eventually, Lorenzo turned onto a quiet drive that led to a small, abandoned workshop on the outskirts of town. The metal roof sagged at one corner. The windows were grimy. The structure looked like it had been forgotten by time, which made it the perfect place to hide. Lorenzo parked behind the building and killed the engine. "We'll stay here for a few hours," he said, "long enough to see if anyone followed us." Elena stepped out, clutching Marina close. The night air tasted metallic. The workshop creaked in the wind like old bones shifting. Inside, the space was empty except for a few dusty shelves and a workbench scattered with rusty tools. Elena sat with Marina against the far wall, letting her daughter curl into her lap. The girl was frightened, exhausted, clinging to Elena's jacket with trembling fingers. Lorenzo remained near the door, watching, listening. Only after several minutes of tense silence did Elena speak. "Why are you helping us?" Her voice was a low whisper, full of distrust and desperate need. Lorenzo turned to her, shadows carving sharp lines across his face. "Because my brother wasn't the only one who got caught in something bigger than himself." His eyes drifted downward, "and because I promised him, if anything ever went wrong, I'd help whoever picked up the pieces." Elena stared at him, shocked. He knew this would happen. Matteo always knew his days were numbered. Lorenzo said quietly, he knew the syndicate would strip his life apart. He didn't know when, but he knew. The weight of that truth pressed against Elena's chest. "What's in that vault?" she whispered. "Why is it worth all of this? Worth people dying, disappearing, running?" Lorenzo sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Not just money, not just evidence. Something worse." Elena leaned forward. "What?" Lorenzo looked at her, really looked at her, as if weighing how much truth to place on her shoulders. "The code." Elena frowned. "Code?" Lorenzo nodded. "Matteo decoded their entire financial network, their operations, their safe houses, their accounts, their hierarchy, every secret they worked decades to bury." Elena stared, stunned. "He didn't just keep evidence," Lorenzo continued. "He built a map that could dismantle an entire empire. And it's all in that vault?" Elena asked, breath shaking. "Not all of it." Lorenzo's voice lowered. "The most dangerous piece the master ledger is still missing." Her heart dropped. "And Darian Corvo wants it," she whispered. "He wants everything," Lorenzo said. "But most of all, he wants to make sure no one can use Matteo's work to destroy the syndicate." Elena's stomach knotted. "And he thinks I took it." "He doesn't think," Lorenzo said darkly. "He knows someone accessed the vault, and you're the only one who did." The building creaked softly, cold wind whistling through a cracked window. Elena pulled Marina closer. "So what do we do?" she whispered. Lorenzo stepped toward her slowly, his expression bleak. "We find the rest of Matteo's code before Darian does." His jaw tightened, because if he gets it first, we won't live long enough to understand what it meant. Elena felt her breath catch. "And where do we even begin?" she whispered. Lorenzo's gaze darkened, a haunted flicker crossing his eyes. "With the one place Matteo swore never to return to," he said. He paused. "The restaurant's old brick oven." Elena's heart stilled. She knew the place. She had seen it. She had felt something strange about it, even before she ever touched the floorboards. The storm outside thickened, as if responding to the truth unfolding. Lorenzo crossed his arms, bracing himself. "That oven isn't what it looks like," he said quietly. Matteo sealed something inside it, something he begged me never to search for. Why? Elena whispered. Because he said anyone who opened it, Lorenzo murmured, would change the story forever. The workshop fell into deeper silence. The wind howled outside. Marina clung tighter. And Elena, heart trembling and breath unsteady, realized something vital, something terrifying. The vault was only the first layer. The second layer waited in the oven, and whatever Matteo hid there. The story was only beginning. The wind outside the abandoned workshop howled like a restless spirit, rattling the loose metal panels along the roof. Inside, the cold crept through the cracks, weaving around Elena's shoulders like invisible fingers. She held Marina close, feeling the small rise and fall of her daughter's breath, the only warmth she could cling to in a night that felt far too dark, far too full of danger. Lorenzo paced slow circles near the door, the tension in his body sharp enough to slice through silence. The faint glow from a single hanging bulb flickered overhead, casting long, broken shadows across his face. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice raw. If Matteo hid something in the oven, why didn't anyone find it? Why didn't the city uncover it when the restaurant was shut down? Lorenzo stopped pacing, because Matteo wasn't reckless. He was brilliant. He knew how to hide things in plain sight. His voice softened, an echo of old admiration. He was a chef first, but he understood heat, pressure, structure. He knew how to embed something behind bricks so well that only someone who knew exactly where to look would ever find it. Elena pictured the oven, the dark brick arch in the corner of the kitchen, soot, stained and silent, its mouth yawning like a forgotten grave. She had walked past it a dozen times. She had never felt anything unusual from it. But now she wondered what secrets slept behind those blackened stones. She rubbed her palms over her jeans, trying to steady her nerves. What exactly did he hide? Lorenzo hesitated. For the first time since she met him, he looked uncertain. Something more dangerous than the money, he said quietly, more dangerous than the evidence in the vault. Something the syndicate wanted badly enough to make my brother disappear. Elena's breath stilled. And you think it's still there? I know it is, Lorenzo replied. Matteo left me clues and warnings. That oven is the key to everything he uncovered, and Darian Corvo will tear the city apart to get what's inside. At the mention of Darian's name, Marina pressed closer to Elena's side. The little girl's whisper trembled. Mom, are we going back? Elena swallowed hard, stroking her daughter's hair. Not tonight, sweetheart. Lorenzo stood at the window, studying the darkness outside. Tonight isn't safe. Darian is moving, and when he moves, he doesn't stop. His voice tightened, a quiet shiver of memory in his tone. He was sent by the syndicate once before, to silence someone. They were never seen again. Elena's stomach dropped. Fear curled through her, cold and relentless. If he finds us, he won't. Lorenzo said, not here, not yet. But the weary line in his brow told her he wasn't certain. Elena rose slowly, shifting Marina in her arms. So what's the plan? Lorenzo leaned his back against the wall, arms crossed. We go back tomorrow, at first light. We get inside the oven and take whatever Matteo hid before Darian does. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. And after that, Elena whispered. Lorenzo paused, eyes darkening. After that, we run, we hide, we protect your daughter, and we pray that whatever Matteo left behind is enough to end this. Elena closed her eyes, the weight of those words pressed on her chest like a stone. The oven wasn't just a clue, it was a crossroads, a line between survival and doom. She sat back down, letting Marina lay her head in her lap. The little girl was exhausted, fear dulling her energy, her body sinking into restless sleep. Elena stroked her hair softly, letting the familiar motion soothe her frayed nerves. Outside, the storm thickened, rain hitting the workshop roof like impatient fingers tapping for entry. Hours passed. Lorenzo remained awake, watching, listening, waiting. Every so often, distant sounds from the road made his posture tense, an engine humming too slow, a door slamming somewhere far off, the whisper of tires on wet pavement. Elena didn't sleep. Her thoughts crawled through every dark corner of memory, the hollow board, the vault, the photographs, the coded ledgers, Darian's cold voice in the hallway, and the oven, always the oven. Finally, when dawn began pushing pale light through the cracks in the workshop walls, Lorenzo stepped toward her. "Elena," he said softly, "it's time." She nodded. Her bones felt heavy with lack of sleep. Her nerves burned with dread, but beneath it all, buried deep, something else stirred, something fierce, something determined, for Marina, for herself, for the truth that Matteo had died trying to reveal. She woke her daughter gently. Marina blinked sleepily, still clinging to Elena's sleeve. Lorenzo opened the workshop door. Bright, cold morning air swept inside, carrying with it a sharp clarity like the world holding its breath before something irreversible happened. They stepped outside. The street was empty, the sky pale, the air crisp with the echo of last night's storm. Lorenzo led them to the car quickly, eyes scanning every rooftop, every alley mouth, every shadow that lingered too long. When they reached the restaurant, Elena's lungs tightened. The building sat in stiff silence, its faded sign catching the morning light, its broken windows staring like hollow eyes. It felt different in daylight. Not safer, not warmer, just awake. Lorenzo unlocked the door and stepped inside first, scanning the room before motioning for Elena and Marina to follow. Dust shifted in the sunlight, dancing like ghosts disturbed from slumber. The room held its breath as they entered. Elena's gaze drifted immediately to the corner kitchen doorway, to the brick oven. It waited in shadow, its soot-stained arch looking darker than ever, deeper, almost alive with secrets pressed into its ancient stones. Marina squeezed her hand. "Mom, it's scary in here." Elena knelt to her level. "Stay close to me, okay? No matter what." Lorenzo moved to the oven without hesitation. He ran his hands along the bricks, tapping them lightly, listening for hollow spaces, his brow furrowed with concentration. He sealed it from the inside. Lorenzo murmured, "This isn't just brick and mortar." Matteo reinforced it. Elena hovered beside him, heart racing. "So how do we open it?" Lorenzo pulled a small chisel and hammer from his coat. Carefully, he tapped the first brick. It didn't budge. He tapped another harder. A faint crack split through the stone. Elena's pulse surged. Brick by brick, Lorenzo worked deeper, revealing a dark cavity behind the outer layer. Dust spilled out like ancient ash. The air grew colder, thicker. Finally, Lorenzo reached inside. Elena held her breath. His fingers pressed against something smooth, something hidden, something wrapped in cloth. Slowly he pulled it forward. Light spilled across it. Elena's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a book. It wasn't money. It wasn't papers. It was a steel box, small but heavy, sealed with a clasp engraved with the same interlocking rings she'd seen on the vault and the trunk. Her heart pounded violently. Lorenzo turned the box in his hands, face pale, breath shallow. "This," he whispered, voice breaking, "this is it." Elena stepped closer. "What's inside?" Lorenzo swallowed. His voice cracked. "The key." Elena blinked. "Key to what?" Lorenzo lifted his eyes to hers, haunted, dark, grim. "To the syndicate's entire operation," he said. "To every secret Matteo unraveled. To everything Darian Corvo is hunting for." He exhaled slowly, shoulders heavy beneath the weight of a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. "And now," he murmured, "we have it." Elena stared at the steel box, feeling the truth burn through her like ice and fire fused into one. The oven had given its secret, but with it came a truth that deepened the danger tenfold. Outside, the morning wind sharpened against the windows, rattling the remaining glass. And as Elena held Marina tighter, her heart trembling in her chest, she understood the terrifying reality. The oven wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of the true hunt, the chase for the key, the fight for survival. The war Matteo tried to outrun, and as Lorenzo closed the steel box, locking its weight into his grasp like a curse, Elena knew with piercing certainty the story was only beginning. After Lorenzo lifted the steel box from the hollow of the oven, something shifted in the restaurant's air, as if the building itself recognized what had been disturbed. The silence deepened, thickening like smoke, wrapping around Elena's shoulders with a cold, unspoken warning. She felt it immediately, so did Lorenzo. Even Marina, still holding her mother's hand, sensed the change and pressed closer. The steel box gleamed faintly in the morning light, its cold surface marked with dust and ash. But beneath that grime lay something far heavier, a truth so dangerous Matteo had sealed it behind firebrick and fear. Lorenzo held the box like a weight he'd spent years trying to outrun. His breath shook once. Just once. Then he set his jaw. "Elena," he murmured, voice low, "we need to leave. Now." She nodded, though her body remained rooted, her legs stiff with adrenaline and dread. The restaurant suddenly felt smaller, its walls leaning closer, its shadows stretching longer, its memories whispering through the cracks. Elena glanced around instinctively, expecting a figure to emerge from the doorway, expecting footsteps, expecting Darian's cold voice to echo through the room. But the air held nothing, only waiting. Stillness, the kind of stillness before a storm breaks. Lorenzo slid the steel box into his coat, concealing its metallic edge beneath the fabric. When he stepped toward the front door, Marina let out a small sound, a frightened whisper caught between her teeth. "Mom, can we go home now?" Elena swallowed the ache rising in her throat. "Soon, sweetheart, we're going somewhere safe." But the word safe felt hollow now, thin as paper, fragile as dust. Lorenzo reached the doorway first. He paused, scanning the street beyond the glass. His posture stiffened, barely perceptible, but enough to stir every alarm in Elena's body. "What is it?" she whispered. Lorenzo didn't answer at first. His eyes narrowed, his shoulders locked. Then he spoke with a voice carved from tension. "We're not alone." Elena's breath stopped halfway up her chest. She grabbed Marina tighter, her heart hammering wildly. "Is it him?" "I don't know," Lorenzo murmured, "but someone is watching." The words chilled her blood. Slowly, Lorenzo stepped outside, motioning for them to follow. Elena lifted Marina in her arms and moved quickly, her body instinctively turning to shield her daughter from the street. The air outside was cool, still damp from the storm, but it carried something else, an unsettling emptiness, like the world had been wiped clean of sound. Elena scanned the street. Nothing, no cars, no movement, no figure standing in the shadows, but the feeling remained, a pressure against her spine, a gaze threading through the quiet. Lorenzo didn't wait to confirm it. He led them across the sidewalk and around the building, taking a narrow path through a cluster of overgrown bushes. When they reached the alley, he paused again, listening, not to noise, to silence, silence that was too heavy, too intentional. "We need to move fast," he whispered. "If Darian's here, he won't stay hidden long."